The webinar today will be divided into several sections. We'll go through the life cycle of a matter from an intake perspective to creating the matter, tracking time and cost on the matter, over invoicing to the client, and in the end, about talking about unbilled WIP, how we manage that. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, we will start creating a matter with our quick matter guide. This will allow us to set up a matter quickly based on a template. I will use our general template, but there will be multiple templates for different kinds of matters. That could be for insolvency, internal cases, pro bono, big cases, small cases. The idea is that the template itself includes all the details about the setup of such a matter, and it's very easy and quick to set up a matter without involving a finance department or other people. Then we will select a client from our list of clients, and then we will designate a matter responsible. In this case, I will designate Prakash. And with that, we have a new matter created. But with a new matter set up, can we actually take on this client? Is there something we need to consider? Now, in this case, it was an existing client, so I've already done KYC. There could also be a matter of conflict of interest, and this is where our compliance assessments come into play. I can create a compliance assessment either related to a matter or unrelated to a matter. In this case, we could do it from here, but I will actually go out and show the compliance assessment list. This is a complete list of all the client assessments we have done, and I'll create a new one here. I can give a description. It always keeps track of who has created the compliance assessment. And then there are two parts to it. There is the conflict of interest part, and there is the KYC part of it. Let's say this wasn't an existing client, it was a new client. Then I can run my KYC check. And in my KYC check, I check, of course, the AML, the sanctions, all the different things that you need to check. And usually we would do that in an outside system, and then we will track the status of it in here. So we will make a connection to a KYC system and get the response back from that system. Now, in this case, I don't have an external system connected, so I can just set this as approved. The other part is a conflict of interest. And you might actually want to do this first if this is something where there could be a conflict of interest. For the conflict of interests, we usually search not only for the client itself, but the organization or the group of companies this company is part of. And we can write part of the name. Let's say this is a worldwide something company. I can start writing that name, and I could write multiple names in here as a list. So I could copy and paste a whole group structure of names. I could also use numbers in here if I have the VAT numbers or the organization numbers, etc. And it'll go through and find all the references we have on earlier cases related to these search terms. Now, it might find things that are not relevant, and this is part of it, of course. So here we can see it finds that we have a party from an earlier case called the Worldwide Bank. It had a relation, it was the opposing party in a matter which was about trademarks. And this is an active case. I can also see who's responsible and when we started this case, and there is more information about it. So if we were to take on Worldwide Bank, we might want to talk to Claire about this because there could be a potential conflict of interest. In this case, it might be another client we're looking for. So this is not a problem. We mark this as either irrelevant because it's someone else, or we could also say it is approved if it is the right thing we have found, but there just is no conflict of interest. Then I would mark it as approved. And we keep this history of what data we have gotten back and what we have actually approved and who approved it. So we can later on prove that we actually performed our conflict of interest search and we did not find any conflict of interest. With that in place, we can see that we now have our conflict of interest search done, and I can mark this as being approved in this case. I will close this assessment, and then it goes into the list of assessments, and it cannot be changed. This is now static in place, and it's part of the audit trail of the compliance checks that we have done. On the matter that we just created, we see that there are a number of lines that correspond to what we can track time and cost for. And this is our structure. Different matters will, of course, have different structures. That could be multiple parts, or it could be very small. For some kinds of matters, there will be special codes to track on. Maybe that is in insolvency cases where we have special codes. It could also be required that you must use special reporting codes, such as leaders codes or other codes that are relevant. On this side here, we see information about deadlines. This could be court dates, it could be other dates that we can create, and we create a whole structure of dates that are relevant to this matter. This is not needed for the matter accounting, it is more into the practice management to keep track of these dates. We also have invoicing instructions. In this case, it is an instruction that comes from the client itself, not this particular matter, and we put in an instruction there's a spend limit on this, but it could be any kind of instruction. And these instructions will follow us through when we get to invoicing. I can also create a matter team with different people having different roles in this. So I could say that there is a person, let's say Cassie, and she has a role of being the lead counsel on this. I can set up my team in here. We can also track securities, that is documents of some kind of value. That could be contracts, etc. So maybe we have a contract and it is placed in safe number 3 and it has a value of 5,000 and it was received today and it was received by Claire. And now we're keeping track of this, and we know that we need to return this before we can close the matter. So we have a traceability on this that we can also report on. And so this is our basic matter setup. From here on out, we can add additional details. If we have an agreed budget of this or an expected budget, it might not be an agreement, but more that is internal. We can put in a budget and say, this is the number of hours we plan to spend on a certain activity. And we can do this by maybe not named individual, but instead by group and say, we need associates to spend a certain amount of time on correspondence. Let's say that is 10 hours in a certain period of time. This could be either very broken down as I have it here with a lot of details. This is over time. But I could also do it on a higher basis, like quarters or years or counting periods. With the budgeting, I also get this turned into an expected cost and expected price based on the rates that I have defined for different groups of people. And maybe I have defined a certain rate for this client as well, or even specifically for this matter. So I can see what is the expected price to be billed out if we bill out all this time. And this makes it possible for me to forecast as well what is our expected workload, what is our expected income in a certain period of time. But this is optional, it is not required. So I have my matter, I have my budget in place, and I can basically start working once I get approval. Now, there are some rules set up on this matter as to who can manage this and who can access it. I designated a matter responsible, but I can also designate other responsible people. And on the client itself, there is a client responsible. So we have multiple people in place and they get special permissions, meaning it is not everyone else who automatically can just go in and make changes to this matter. This requires one of the responsible people to give other people access to this matter as well, so we control who can change what. On a side note on that, you can also control who can actually track time on this. That is optional. You can also leave it open and everyone can track time on this. So with this in place, we now have our matter and we can move on to actually start working on the matter and planning for the work on it. So this could be a case where we know what to do, but we could also have specific pieces of work that we know we need to get done and we want to track that. And for that, we have what we call work items. I can create a work item, which is something to do that we track is going to be done. And I can do that on either the matter or in general. I can see here on my home screen, I already have some things that is assigned to me to do. Some are overdue and some are due soon. I can view this work across the company as well with a Kanban board where I can see that we have some administrative tasks. We should update our standard forms for 2026, and that is assigned to David. That is actually marked as being overdue because we should have updated this already. In our compensation package project, we have some contract extensions. So these are all the pieces of work that we need to get done. I can open these up and review who is assigned to it, when should it be done, and how far are we. In this case, it is assigned to Prakash, and it should be started by the 15th, and it is due by the 18th. I can also see that I have a number of things to do related to this. I should first collect the old documents and I should create the proposal and somebody should review the proposal. And as these are done, we can mark these off as being completed. And so we're tracking the progress. So for tasks where you want to be able to track the progress and make sure it's done, especially for junior staff, this might be a very good method. I can also delegate part of this work. So I could say, for instance, for the review proposal, I would like to create a new piece of work out of this. So I would create a new piece of work, and now we have a review proposal to be done, and I could assign that to someone else, saying this should be done by Cassie. And I can now see here that the review proposal part is no longer for me, it is for someone else, in this case Cassie. And the completion of this will be tracked by Cassie. Whenever she completes a work item, this part of the bigger work item is marked as being completed. When creating these work items, you don't always want to start from a blank slate. So if I create a new work item in here, I can then apply a template saying we want to perform some task. It could be a KYC check or a contract extension. Let's say it's a KYC check. And we want to do that for the matter we just created. And that is related to administration. So it's in here. And then I already have my checklist that somebody needs to check off as they're done. I could, in this case, assign this to Cassie. And I could set a start date and a due date. Maybe this is due at the end of the week and she should start by tomorrow. And there will be email notifications to Cassie about this. And if she hasn't started the work or completed the work, they could also be notified about it. So this is part of the process. I can, of course, reassign this to someone else. And then when I start the work, I would mark this as being in progress. This was a bit about the work tracking. Again, it is an optional part, but it allows you to track these pieces of work where you want to make sure they're done and somebody else can also see if they are done or not. Let's move over to actually working on the matter, doing the work and tracking the time. For tracking the time, this can be done in multiple ways. I can track my time as I go. And for that, I can use either the interface I have here. Of course, if I'm only a person who tracks time and I'm not managing a lot of invoicing, etc., I will have a much smaller role center with a lot less buttons, but I could do it from in here. I could also go ahead and use a special tool we have, which is a small Windows application, which is used in here to track time. So I can always have that on screen and I can work on something. I could say add an entry and I can decide what it's on. Maybe I'm in a presentation at this moment and we can see that the time is now ticking. And then I will go in here and say, who is this for? Maybe this is for a datum corporation. It is related to a certain matter, maybe the demo one, and this is external meeting. And so now I'm tracking the time on this and this will go on to my timesheet. This is a very easy way to track the time as you go. And I can start and stop these, especially if I'm coming back to something. I might be stopping the presentation to go work on that agreement. Then I can just pause my presentation and then start the agreement and it will add additional time. So I can accumulate time over the day. Back into Business Central, we will then see what this looks like, because this will show up in my time tracking calendar. My time tracking calendar shows all the things that I have tracked time on throughout the day. And we can see here, I tracked some time yesterday and I have some time tracked today. And also I'm now currently tracking time on the presentation I'm in. For each of these, I of course selected what I was working on, and that could be from within the Windows tracker, but I can also do it here after the fact. We can see here on this new process for agreements, I haven't selected a project and task, and so I could open this up and say, this is for a certain client or project or task, or I could select a work item. And maybe this is what I want to do. I want to select this to the KYC check we just created, and it automatically designated to the right client, the right matter, and the right task as well. And so I am now done. If I need to add additional tracking in here that I didn't track with my start-stop clock, I could also use my Outlook calendar as a reference. So I can open that up and I can see everything I had in my calendar and I can actually add that in. So if I have something on my calendar, I say, yeah, that's actually what I did. I can simply add that in on my calendar. And then of course I can adjust it because maybe the timing wasn't just right. And if it is not right, I can simply go ahead and delete it. So this is a very easy way to add that. In addition, we could also show calls that we have if we have used Microsoft Teams. In this case, I can see that I had calls throughout the day. And this is the actual time that that call took, which is now shown in here. And again, I can add that in here with that plus button. So it's very easy to track your time. I can also look at this on a day-by-day basis to get a complete picture of the day. And of course, I can reference and calculate out what is the total number of hours I have tracked and how is that after we apply some rounding to the time, because we of course round to some kind of interval that could be the nearest 6 minutes or whatever you have decided is your standard for time. I could also try to get additional information. I have AI feature here, complete timesheet, that will go ahead and look through the information it can find in the Microsoft ecosystem. Again, it looks at the calendar, it looks at other things I have. It could be emails I've sent, emails I received, and then it will suggest what I worked on. And here it suggests that I had a block for focus time that it could fill in with that. Now, in this case, that's probably too generic, but it might be a good suggestion that it comes up with. And then it also explains why it used that and filled it in. In this case, this is not relevant, so I will simply delete it. But this can be really helpful to find those extra small pieces of work that you cannot really attribute to anything. What did I do in this area of time? Did I just have lunch, or did I actually send some work emails that I should be able to charge for? Then at the end of the day, I will update my timesheet with these entries so it is always in sync and I can submit my timesheet. If we look at the timesheet, it then lists all that was done with the time tracked, if there was time tracked, and the number of hours that converts into. Again, applying that rounding. And that could be rules about if we're rounding up to the nearest 6 minutes or nearest 15 minutes, etc. I can also enter entries in here manually. I don't have to use the time tracker. I could simply go in and say, well, we worked on something for, let's say, in this case, tray research. And for tray research, I only have one matter and it's always suggesting my general task. So I just need to select this client in this case because I cannot track time on anything else. And then I put in that this was 2 hours of time. Now I have to provide a description of the work I did. Here I can either go with writing this on my own, but I could also select from a set of predefined standard text. Here I have an agreement text, for instance, that I can use. And of course I need to add in some details in here, and it also requests me to say what I discussed. This was discussed with John. When I have a description like this, in some cases, it is not the best description. And again, I can use a Copilot feature to improve that description and get a suggestion for a better description. In this case, it just padded it out and made it maybe somewhat better. Of course, I can make my own changes, but it always tries to make something that is better. And now, instead of just saying meeting prep, it tried to create a text that actually looks a bit better. I can actually write a quite long narrative here describing all the work I did, and this can later go on a specification together with the invoice. In this case, I am done and I will submit my timesheet. We can, of course, have a procedure that sends out reminders to people about the timesheets they haven't submitted, and then from that reminder, they can do the submission on their own. This can be really helpful, especially if you have people who are not always submitting their time on time. You get an email, there is a list of the entries that you have graded already, and then there's a link to either review and adjust or submit now. You don't actually have to go back into Business Central yourself. You can just get the email and then you click the submit now button. We also escalate to managers, etc. in multiple stages if people haven't submitted their timesheet. But in this case, I will submit my timesheet. By submitting the timesheet, it could go into an approval process. We often see, especially in the legal space, that we don't use that first step of approval. We want to get it in as time, and then when we come to invoicing, we will check whatever goes on the invoice or not. But there is a possibility to have an approval process on the time, and you can set that up for certain individuals. So maybe there's some people in the organization where the time should be approved. That could be more associate and junior staff, whereas other people, their time just goes directly onto the matter itself. I can also create expense reports in here, and that can go on to a matter. So there is an expense report function in here where you can create an expense report, just add in what is the matter and what was the expense. And of course, you will add an attachment as well with the details of that expense. And then you submit that. And again, there could be an approval process for it. Now we have some time tracked on the matter. Let's move into actually getting paid. And for that, we will look at the matters we have something to invoice on. I will open up my list of matters to invoice. I have access to a long list of different matters where there is something to invoice. For each of these, I can have a process of who's responsible for invoicing. So if you want to separate out the responsibility of the matter from the responsibility of invoicing this, it is possible. I could take a matter like this, where I say there's a matter responsible, but there's also an invoicing responsible. In this case, it is the same, but it doesn't have to be the same. Down here, we can see there is a matter where Connie is responsible, but Cassie is responsible for invoicing. And so when we have a matter that we want to invoice, we would usually go through and look at the details of what is on that matter. So I can take this one, for instance, I can open it up, and this is where we check what should go onto the matter. And we can see that we have 3 entries that are suggested to go onto this matter. I can then decide either to leave this as is. I can change the chargeability if something shouldn't be chargeable. Maybe it shouldn't have been chargeable in the first place. I can also move it to another matter or another task if this was incorrectly placed. I can change the number of hours to invoice. In this case, this was tracked as 1.7 hours. Maybe we can only invoice for half an hour. So I can make changes here. And with that, I can then create the invoice. When I create the invoice, I can do that either one by one from within here, or if I have a longer list of invoices I want to work with, I can go in and simply say create document. And I can do this for multiple documents, and it will start processing these and creating the document in the background for me to look at and review later. We can even set it up to also send this for review or approval on creation. So I simply go in and mark the matters that I want to create invoices for one by one. When it has done that, it will update with the invoice number it has created. In this case, it also created a draft invoice as a PDF that I could have a look at. So I can simply open that up and see there's a draft invoice. In this case, 4 hours for legal services. But there's also a specification attached with all the work done line by line. And this is configurable by each matter. Do we want to have a specification? Do we want to show the price of each entry? Do we only want to show the quantity? How should it be grouped, etc.? This is a matter setup, and that came from the template I selected. With a matter like this, I can also send it for review or approval. So if I open up the invoice itself, I have the possibility to say this needs to be approved. This can be an automatic process. In this case, I'm doing it manually. I would like to request a review on this, and we can make the review mandatory. In this case, it is already being defined who should do the review. Here it is Prakash, who is the reviewer, and so I should be able to send this for review, and I get an email looking something like this. I'm acting as Prakash. Attached, you'll find the invoice and some statistics about the invoice, the total amount, and of course a PDF of that invoice again, so I can review it immediately and say, yes, this actually looks perfect. This is just what I want to do. So I will just click approve now. But I could also immediately reject it, or I could say review and adjust. And if I do the review and adjust, I'm sent into Business Central to the right document in a page that is a more slimmed down version of the invoice, so it's not so overwhelming for a fee earner to review. We hide all the details about the rules of invoicing and so on to only show what is relevant. And so here I can do my review. I can see these were, in this case, 4.1 hours. This is what it adds up to. There were also some disbursements. There were even something that wasn't included on this invoice, maybe because the description was really strange. But I know about that this was held and not invoiced and is waiting for invoicing in the future. So I know why it is this number of hours. And I can look into the details and see what is the underlying lines in here. And then when I'm done, I can of course say, yes, I would like to approve this, and it changes status into being something that has now been reviewed, and it can move on in the process and be posted as an invoice for the client to pay. There could be multiple steps in this process. There could be a review step, an approval step, etc. So this is basically the end-to-end. We created a matter, we looked at compliance, we decided on how much time we could spend on this matter. We planned for it with some work items to do some additional checks. And also we, of course, tracked some time on the matter and we invoiced it. in the end. Following up on this, we might say, well, there are matters where we cannot invoice for all the time. We have some unbilled work in progress. So here we are more into a financial process where we can look and say, well, what do we have as unbilled on the different matters? And we can see here that for most of the matters, we have invoiced out all the time, but there are definitely some where there is some money that we haven't been able to invoice out. And we would then like to post this to a WIP account in the finance part of it. So we take that as WIP income. There are even rules for this, how we value that time. We can set up rules and saying if time is older than a certain time, then we value it less. So there could be stages of this where we value it less and less the older it is without being invoiced. And there could be different rules for different kinds of matters as well. So we take that into consideration and conservative in our estimates for the income on these matters. I can also look at this from a reporting perspective. We have a large number of different reports. One of the more detailed ones is the client engagement report, where I can look at what we have done for a certain client. Let's take a Datum corporation. Maybe we also look at those for a certain client responsible or those for a certain period of time. We could also focus on write-offs. We haven't talked much about write-off, but you can do write-offs on time. And then I get a detailed report with all the entries and how much is done by, in this case, each fee earner. We can see how much is done by Cassie and Claire and David, etc., etc., etc. And also if we have to adjust the pricing and the rates. And what does this price adjustment mean? Well, that could come in two different flavors. It could be either specific changes at invoicing time, or it could be more overall changing of the value to invoice. So back into our matters to invoice. If I open up an invoice again that we have created and haven't posted, I can see on this invoice we have time spent to the value of 5,554. I might want to adjust that down or up. And for that, I can do a price adjustment, prorated. We can see that this is covered by 3 different fee earners. So each have contributed a certain amount of work into this, and this adds up. But I might want to say, well, we can only invoice this out at 5,000. And this means that we have to adjust the rates on each of these by 9.97%. Now I can restructure that in some regard and say, well, actually, Cassie did a fine job, so I will value her time at 2,100. Claire also did reasonably well, but we still also need to write her time down. But Prakash, he did an excellent job, and so maybe we actually write his time up and say this is worth 1,000. And so we end up with a different amount. Sometime we write up, some we write down, and get to the result we want. If we want to end on 5,000, of course, we have to make sure the numbers add up. And with this, we can close it. And now we get an invoice that in the end will be for 5,500 to the end customer. That was what we adjusted it for. And that will be, in this case, a very small write-off. We are writing off of the additional, in this case, only 54, but we are doing a small write-off. And this is what we're capturing in our report, that we are not invoicing at the full rate. This concludes the end-to-end walkthrough of Pryme Legal. There is, of course, a lot of additional features, so I would recommend that you look at some of our other webinars to cover some more of the details of these. That could be subcontracted work when you're using outside resources to help you with some of your matters. It could be more details on using the work items. It could also be even more features that we have for time capture, but this is what we have time for today.